Hello and welcome to the My Dietitian Journey podcast. My name is Adam, co-host and producer. With me, of course, Felicia Peraza of Peraza Nutrition and My Dietitian Journey. Today is a special episode because we are going to be doing a deep dive, updated version of how to start a private practice from nothing, from scratch, updated 2023 version. We've learned a few things, mostly Felicia has learned many things over the course of several years of doing this, and we have some updates to start with, and it's basically going to be the full guide. So feel free to come back to this video periodically, check things. We'll have links to everything in the description in terms of what you need to do, where you need to go to do various things, and I'll have this time stamped out so you can come back to it. Use it as a reference for starting your practice along the way. So what are we going to get into first?
So the first part of this is just like the basic steps that you need to start your practice. So one of the first things that you're going to need is an EIN, or Employer Identification Number, also known as your Federal Tax Identification Number. So this is the first thing that you want to have ready to go. When you fill out this application, this is going to be through the IRS. You can do a mailed version of this application, a paper one, but I just suggest the online one because you get your EIN instantly. So what you're going to need before you start this application, because you can't save it, your entity type, the state that you're going to do business in, your social security number, your business name, and then your mailing address. You want to check your Department of State if you're in the United States. Check their Department of State website to see if your business name is available. And then your business entity, this is basically your business structure. So there's sole proprietor, there's partnerships, there's LLCs, and then also corporations. I recommend going with an LLC. I did not start that way.
Trial and error there.
So
learn from our mistakes.
Yes.
Felicia's mistakes. LLC is good to start with, you're saying, right?
Yes, LLC is good to start with. And the definitions for all of these different business entity types are on the IRS website, and then also there's Small Business Administration websites, and they also have descriptions and pros and cons of each of them. So you can apply for this EIN directly on the IRS website. Something that is very, very important to note: when you complete the online application, you will get a confirmation letter that you will need to download, save it somewhere, and print it off, because you will never get it again. Which
never again.
Sounds very ominous, but it's very
gone.
true.
Download it, save it. So for our Canadian viewers and listeners, some things may change a little bit, but probably there is a component that is just very similar for wherever you're at. Can't really speak for Europe. No idea how it goes over there.
Not sure. Maybe someone can give some insight in the comments.
Maybe. So, and for what it's worth, we're going to get into how to get an MPI next. Felicia does do consulting, small business consulting. You can hire us to walk you through this step by step. If you have any questions or any snags along the way and you need individualized specific help, feel free to check out the website and sign up for some consulting. That said, if you just have a quick question or whatever, leave a comment and we'll get back to you. So how do you get your NPI?
So the NPI, which is something that you need if you are going to accept insurance as a provider, so it's the National Provider Identifier, is a 10-digit ID for covered healthcare providers. And so you need this. You would get it through the NPPES website, which we're going to link. So there's a type 1 NPI and a type 2. So type 1 is for individual healthcare providers. So you as an individual, you would have an individual NPI, a type 1. And you're going to apply for this with your social security number. The NPI type 2 is for healthcare providers who are organizations. So if you have an LLC, you would get a type 2 NPI for the LLC, and then you as an individual would have a type 1 NPI. So this is important, especially if you are planning to hire dietitians in the future. You want to make sure you have that group type 2 NPI for your organization, and then your individual NPI. This is something that follows you everywhere. So if you're working for a company and you have an NPI already, that is your individual one that you are utilizing under their company NPI. So it only takes a few minutes to get your NPI online in terms of the application process. And again, that will not change. So if you change your name or anything, you would update in the system.
So when you get your type 1 NPI, you have to apply again separately for your type 2?
Yes.
And for what it's worth, most other practices that we work with, when we call for referrals and whatnot, they want the group MPI.
Yes.
They ask for the group MPI. So they're used to asking for that. So if you don't have it, I don't think it'll be an issue, but you should just get it anyway while you're at it.
Yeah.
So next up, you got your EIN, you got your MPI. You'll want to look for liability insurance.
Yes. So your liability insurance, there's professional liability insurance, and then there's also general liability insurance. So for professional liability insurance, this is going to basically help to protect you against any kind of like financial losses as a result of negligence or malpractice or errors. So you definitely want this, and it is required if you are going to be an insurance provider. I use Pro Liability from Mercer. They have professional liability insurance, plus they have this like non-patient care services. So like anything that's like educational or consulting for an additional $25 a year. So I just renewed mine recently and it ended up being $151 a year with that patient add-on. Now, I don't have a brick and mortar business where I see patients, so I don't have general liability insurance. But if you are seeing patients in person, this is something that you want to also look at adding, just so you're protecting financial losses as any result for property damage or like bodily image or anything like that.
And that's specific if you have a brick and mortar location that you're renting or leasing for your business, not necessarily if you happen to be using a physical space like another company's building, or if when you were with the Chamber of Commerce, you used one of their conference rooms or one of their offices. This doesn't apply to that.
Yes, because they have general liability insurance. So that's the key thing is like if you are having patients come and see you, or if you're having them, you have a home office too, and they're coming in person, you want that general liability. If you are going to, let's say, a business or something like that, they have their own general liability insurance.
So even if it's your house, you still want this?
Yes.
All right. Next up, we're going to get into some stuff that is state specific in the United States, at least. We're in Pennsylvania, so things may vary depending on your state. It's a good idea to check. But what are we going to get into for specific states where you're at? What do you get into next?
So one of the things that you're going to need to do is register your business in your state. And this is where it's going to look a little different based on the state that you're in. So any kind of like forms or registration information is going to be based on your state and then also your county. So in Pennsylvania, for example, I needed to file certificate of organization and register my business within the department of the state. If you, let's say, have my company name for at least Peraza Nutrition is Peraza Nutrition. It's my last name. And then I have my dietitian journey. So in certain instances, you might need to also file what's called a fictitious name because your name does not match. Like if you have a name like John Smith, for example, there's many, many individuals with that name. So you might also need to register like a doing business as name too. The other thing to look at is you're going to need to probably register, which is something I needed to do in Pennsylvania, for tax accounts for state tax and then also employer accounts. And this can be something that you could do in conjunction with working with like an accountant. Like we have a tax accountant, and that made this process a lot easier. And then the Department of Revenue website will have information as to what specific tax information you need to do and what things you need to have on file. And then lastly, businesses, if you're like a brick and mortar business, you may need to also get a permit and a license, especially for your county. Or I was in Philadelphia for a bit before we moved, and I needed a commercial activity license, which was free. It just basically like registered the business with a specific county. So that's something else to look at too. So state specific paperwork, and then also your county may also have paperwork for you to fill out to have a license or a permit for your business.
If we have resources to link for how to discover what is required of your state or county, we'll link that stuff in the description as well. Mm-hmm. And from there, if you reach that step and you complete all of the steps that were previous, you can technically start doing business if you're not accepting insurance.
Yes.
if you're doing out-of-pocket cash pay. But if you want to accept insurance, there are some additional steps.
Yes.
So let's get into that, right?
Yeah. So the first big step is going to be what's called the CAQH application, which is the Council for Affordable Quality Healthcare. So this application, it's basically a credentialing database that helps you to eliminate duplicate paperwork for insurance companies. So if you're new to using the CAQH, you need to register first and get a provider ID, and then you'll get account access. Now, one thing that is important to note for the CAQH application is that this is for commercial insurances. So Medicare has their own complete application process on their website, and we have a link that'll be in the description that actually walks you through the Medicare application. We do have a video on that as well.
On that note, we do have videos specifically for acquiring your EIN and your MPI as short form, just a little piece with some visuals and some links. So I'll link the relevant videos to anything that we have an individual video for in the description as well.
Now, with the CAQH application, just something else to keep in mind, you're going to need things like your EIN, your NPI, your professional liability insurance. Also, if you are in a state that has licensure, you're also going to need a copy of your license and upload that. So the things that we've gone over already are going to be necessary for you filling out that CAQH application. So after you fill out the CAQH application, the next thing you want to do is determine which insurances, the individual insurance companies you're going to want to work with, and then you're going to apply to be a provider on their website. So most insurance companies have a link on their website that says like join our network or become a provider. And this is typically in the provider resources section of the website. So you're going to need your NPI, the CAQH ID, and then also information about your specialties. So like as a dietitian, your contact information, and also your business address. So we are going to talk about that as well with like how you can maybe set up your business if you are not necessarily using a brick and mortar. And then once your application is approved for each insurance company, you're going to be contacted by the insurance company for credentialing, which is basically the verification of information. And they verify things like your education, your training, all of that kind of stuff. And this is that process of then becoming a provider, which leads you into contracting. So you get your formal contract where you sign that. And this can take anywhere from like 30 to 60 days or even longer. So I recommend at this stage making sure that you're keeping track of all of your tracking numbers that you get for these applications, and then also when you submit each of these applications, so you can kind of keep an idea on that timeline as to when you submitted and when you should hear back in terms of like credentialing and then also contracting phase.
So while you're waiting for a lot of this stuff to go through, there are some other things that you should be doing or that are smart to do to kind of get yourself in order in other areas. So do you want to get into the finance stuff?
Yeah, so a big piece of this is getting your financials in order in terms of like what exactly is going to be your hourly rate. So you can utilize the free online fee schedule lookup tool through the CMS. And this is a really great way to kind of just get an understanding of like your base rates if you're not sure what to charge. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Setting up a business bank account. Now, this is something that's going to be really important for depositing checks. Most insurance companies at this point want you to have electronic funds transfer set up, EFTs. And so you will need to have a business bank account and then a void check to be able to submit. And then depending on whether or not you are self-pay, or actually even if you're not self-pay, you still want to be able to process payment for like co-pays or things like that. So looking at like merchant kind of terminals, which can be something that you maybe get along with your business bank account if you have like merchant services. But there's other options for that as well, like Stripe, and we'll talk about that a little bit.
And Square, we use Stripe.
We use Stripe, yes. Stripe and Square are two big ones. And this is something that if you get an EMR, a lot of them have credit card processing features and they integrate with like Stripe or Square. But you can also just get an account with like a payment processing platform like Stripe or Square and then just process payments like directly through that website. And then as you're kind of getting your financials in order, you want to think about ways to kind of track your financials. So using online tools, there's like QuickBooks, Wave is another one, or just like Excel and Google Sheets are another option.
QuickBooks is kind of the quintessential option for this that most people use.
Yeah.
You can like run your own bookkeeping business with QuickBooks if you want. It's that robust of a program. And probably the recommended program for most small businesses. Yeah,
it's very user friendly. I used it for a while. I was doing like paper tracking of my financials, then I moved to QuickBooks, and then I just moved to Google Sheets just, in terms of preference. But QuickBooks is really nice. You can also scan receipts too. So if you had like a printed version of something, and it was really easy to like integrate with like a bank account to just kind of like have everything all in one spot and add notes on different transactions. So I really liked the interface when I was using it. And then the last thing is you're kind of going through this process. I mentioned this earlier, but getting a tax accountant, kind of doing some research, finding someone to help you with filing your business tax returns. That's something that is a business expense and a write-off. So you definitely check in with your tax accountant on that, but it will save you time and a headache filling out your own taxes.
Yeah, the hiring of an accountant is like a few other things too. You can hire out. It's worth doing if you have the funds, especially once you get up and running and you can consider it a cost of doing business. It might feel like a loss to pay out for something you can do yourself, but saving yourself the time and any potential mistakes, there's a reason we have accountants, and it's definitely worth hiring one if you can swing that.
Yeah.
So on the patient side of things, what needs to happen to be ready to actually see patients?
So a big thing is like how you're going to see patients. So you're going to see people face-to-face, virtually, in home, and that's going to then determine whether or not you need to get office space. So if you're going to rent office space or maybe sublet from another healthcare provider, maybe using co-working spaces or renting per hour. So that's something to consider. If you're virtual, so I'm 100% virtual at this point. I started off doing home visits and going to businesses and conducting nutrition counseling for employees. So I had never rented my own office space. But if you're virtual, making sure you have like an appropriate setting for your background, making sure you have like just some basic tools like a webcam, obviously a microphone, some good lighting, just like a simple ring light. We just got one recently.
Actually go out of your way to get some form of lighting. Don't just rely on the lamp in the room or ambient light. Actually get a light to light yourself. And if you can, get 2 lights to light yourself evenly, just so you look good on camera. If your business is virtual, it's important to look appropriate. Right now, we have 2 lights on either side of us, which is why we don't have any shadows on our face, for example, if you're watching.
And then you're also going to make sure that you have HIPAA compliant software and assigned what's called BAA, Business Associate Agreement. So if you are using an EMR, that's something that's going to be a feature you're going to look for. So like Simple Practice is what I use. There's also Calyx, Practice Better. We just recently did a video on like what to look for with choosing an EMR.
Link in the description.
And then if you haven't figured out which EMR you're going to use just yet, you could also use, there's a platform called Doxy.me. It's free. And then also we're going to talk about like emails in a second, but if you have Google Workspace, for example, Google Meet is something covered under their BAA. So you can also use Google Meet as an option before you maybe go into looking at an EMR. But definitely, I would suggest getting an EMR. It really just helps to streamline things. And
that may seem like another unnecessary upfront cost in terms of getting things that you're paying for, services and whatnot. But it's similar to the accountant side of things with your finances. Getting an EMR, if you're primarily going to be based on seeing patients and not self-pay, just kind of winging it programs or whatever, the EMR is like, it's an all-inclusive system. It's going to help you stay way organized. It's just going to solve a bunch of problems for you that may seem abstract if you're in the beginning stages, but you will discover problem after problem that an EMR would solve if you started with one.
Yeah. So some of the things we're going to talk about next, actually, an EMR will help solve. And one thing too, appointment reminders is a big one that I used to send manual appointment reminders when I started, and it was a lot of time I was spending for each email and like figuring out the appointment, typing it in and all that kind of stuff. So much easier to have the EMR like auto send these reminders out. Also with your patients, you want to think about how they're going to schedule with you. So if they're going to schedule through email, phone, your website, or an EMR has, you can look for scheduling options. So like my website, there's a scheduling tool directly on the website where someone can schedule. And then that goes right to Simple Practice for me. If a patient is going to be calling you, you want to make sure that you have a HIPAA compliant number and voicemail. So an example, we use Google Workspace. And then also if patients are emailing you, you need to make sure you have HIPAA compliant email, which could be something that you get through, again, like a Google Workspace, or Microsoft Suite has a HIPAA version of that as well. So there's a lot of options for that, but you do want to make sure that you have HIPAA compliant email and then also phone. And then another big thing is getting referrals. So if you are in practice and you're going to be working with doctor's offices, actually just if you're working with patients, because you're going to at some point probably need to get a referral or copy of labs or records, you want to make sure that you have a way to get those faxes. So one option is SR fax, which is what I utilize. There's a couple of other options out there as well. And then again, making sure you have the version that is the healthcare version. So you could sign a BAA so it is HIPAA compliant. So for me, my faxes come electronically and I get a PDF directly to my email. It makes it a lot easier. I could just download it and then add it to the patient chart.
That is a necessary step. If anyone's like younger than 30, they probably don't really understand faxes or why that's relevant still, but the way the information is sent is encrypted in such a way that it's protected from a lot of the issues that you see with email. And it can come to you electronically via email, but it's still utilizing a fax number. It's a bunch of technical stuff that I'm not well versed enough to speak on, but just know that a fax is an essential piece of this if you're going to receive information from doctors' offices, referrals, and things like that.
Yeah. And speaking of patient charts, you want to make sure that you are storing those if you don't have an EMR, making sure you're storing those so you can maintain HIPAA compliance. So if you're doing paper charts, locked filing cabinet, using encrypted flash drives. But again, this is where having an EMR will help to solve this issue and be, again, just a way to keep yourself organized, keep things streamlined. And this was something that I started with paper charts when I started saving money, but also kind of wasn't really sure about like which EMR to use. And just from kind of going to the EMR right away would have saved me probably a lot of time. And then with using an EMR and with onboarding patients, you want to make sure you have your practice forms in order, which again, if you're using an EMR, there's a lot of templates in there. We do have a video on onboarding patients and what things to include and have on file. But some of your basic things, you're going to need HIPAA privacy notice, and then also a notice of privacy practices, which would get posted on your website, or if you're brick and mortar, you would have a printed version of this. And then patients have to sign that they have received the privacy notice. An informed consent for nutrition services, also an informed consent for telehealth, which again, if you're using an EMR, a lot of them have templates for the informed consent for telehealth. And then also like a new patient form. So like your onboarding form, like the information you want to have about like their medical history, their different medications that they're taking, supplements, diets that they've been on, what things they're hoping to get out of nutrition counseling with you. A business policies form is another big one. Mine is on my website, so you can use that as a guide. Just information as to filing insurance claims, how I'll collect copays, self-pay individuals, no-show and cancellation information. And then lastly, your communication consent, which is another big one where people are consenting to either text, email, or voicemail. So if you need to connect with them between appointments, you want to make sure you have consent on file to reach out.
So that's kind of the bulk of it right there. Mm-hmm. That's starting the business, all the business and technicals of everything specific to dietitians, as well as just starting a business. And then we also mentioned the finance piece, maybe hiring someone out for that, but then other things to consider. So, if you're a small business owner, especially if you're a one-person show, basically you're always going to, no matter what you're doing, you're wearing three hats. You are your business, whatever your product, service is. You are the finance person for yourself, whether you hire that out or whether you do it. That's another piece you need to consider. And the third piece for any business is always going to be marketing. Mm-hmm. So what are the considerations for marketing when you're getting into something like this?
So you want to consider who your target patient or client is, because that is where you want to direct your marketing efforts. So if you, let's say, are going to work with individuals who have diabetes, that's going to be your specialty. You're going to want to connect with physicians in the area that specialize, so like endocrinologists or even private practice or primary care physicians as well, and making sure that you make those connections. But you also want to think about like your online presence and marketing yourself, especially if you're focusing in a certain area like diabetes, making sure your online presence reflects that. So definitely getting a website, even if it's literally just one page with your information, contact information, and like a page about yourself. It doesn't have to be like super lengthy or anything like that with multiple pages. It could just be like very bare bones. But your website, that is something that is going to be important for just making like more of a presence online. So having that is going to be really key.
You need somewhere to send people. People need to find you. If you're not present online, you don't exist.
And even with like the insurance directories now, a lot of them let you link your website. And if someone is pulling a list of dietitians in their area and they're like, I don't know which one to choose, two things usually happen. One, they call through the entire list, and whoever picks up first is who they schedule with, or whoever calls back is who they schedule with. And then also I have had patients who, find me on their insurance website, and then they go and search my name or go to my website and they compare, dietitians, which is something that people are going to do. They want to know who they're going to be working with, if it's going to be a good fit. So having that online presence can be really helpful for getting patients to be able to connect with you and, getting more in your practice.
It's kind of a different world now when you're finding healthcare providers online and you're able to window shop for your healthcare provider. And then Felicia's also got like stuff about her, pictures, but a scheduler. So a new patient can literally schedule from the website without even interacting with us.
Yeah.
I mean, they need to send some stuff and there's some exchange of documents and whatnot, but they don't even have to call. They can literally schedule online just by themselves.
Yeah. And sometimes that can be a barrier for people, like making the phone call, like when am I going to call? Or, if they don't get an answer from someone, and it's a lot easier just people to go on the website and schedule. They're already in, they can kind of look at their calendar and when they're going to, fit this appointment in. And the scheduler is great, on my end, because then I get the information, I can send off all the paperwork, but it also saves me time and us time for having to call the patient, to get information and all of that. It's just something they're doing on their end.
Social media platforms, another consideration?
Yeah. So depending on where your patients are hanging out, you might be looking more towards like Facebook or Instagram. There's also Twitter. Do people use Twitter anymore?
Twitter's in a weird place right now. We don't need to get into it. It's X now. It's like a paid platform now. It's a whole thing. Yeah, don't even worry about Twitter.
YouTube is another place. LinkedIn, blogs, and then obviously things like TikTok. But it very much depends on, the demographic that you're targeting. And I'd say for most of my patients, they're like in their 50s and 60s range. They are not, I'd say for the majority of them, they're not using
on TikTok, no?
No.
Well, you have some patients that were born in the 90s. You have some.
I have a few. Yeah, I have a few. More recently, I've been getting some younger patients that are, in the 20 to 40 range versus like my 50 to 60-year-old patients. And those ones are definitely not on TikTok. And even Facebook, some of them they'll scroll through, but it's not really much. So that's something to consider again. And most of my patient referrals are, for my practice anyway, are people Googling me. Like they'll say, I've just Googled dietitian and my zip code, finding me on the insurance directory, which, we are very pro insurance and becoming an insurance provider. And then their doctor's offices, why it's important to look to building connections in your area, because that's another big referral source is businesses and doctor's offices referring patients.
So as pro-insurance as we are, if you're looking to do other things that are self-pay, there are other marketing considerations to have, especially if you're virtual. If you are going self-pay and virtual, the world is your oyster. You can have people attend group classes from anywhere in the world that you hold at a specific time. You can do one-on-one work, same deal, any specific place, any specific time, and then your marketing will change depending on who you're looking for. Really targeting your marketing can be the make or break between how many clients or patients you have, depending on what you're doing. So the marketing piece is more serious and more of a consideration if you're relying less on insurance, because with insurance, it's sort of baked in. They can find you. But if you're looking to do other things or incorporate fitness or like wellness, yoga, meditation, stuff like that, along with your business, you'll need other marketing materials and to focus more on stuff like social media platforms and maybe some paid ad campaigns on things like Google.
Yeah. That's definitely a good point. And, if you are someone who is 100% virtual, I don't want you to think like, if I'm virtual, it doesn't mean I should connect with anybody in person. That's not the case. A lot of my patients now, again, come from doctor's offices, but virtual is still a very prominent option. So they again, they're going to their primary care physician, and then their primary care is like, hey, you should see a dietitian. Here's a dietitian that you can see. So looking at local businesses can be a really great way to also build out your clientele. And again, if you're seeing, let's say you're holding group classes, for example, you can go over to a doctor's office or looking at other businesses too. Like I was working with like a women-owned fitness center for a while, like a gym. And that was like a great way to kind of connect with obviously a large group of people. And then I was also working with and still working with like a gas company where they have like a healthcare incentive. So the opportunity isn't just with doctor's offices. Like think in terms of other businesses that you could potentially connect with, because especially if they have like health incentive programs, they're looking for dietitians and they don't know where to find them necessarily.
And another thing, like obviously you should do everything with other businesses. Doctor's offices though, if you're looking to connect with a doctor's office, you can literally just walk in and leave a stack of business cards, talk to a front desk person. Don't be afraid to ask to speak to the doctor or a doctor or whoever is on site and have just a quick 5 minutes with them. These places aren't, it's the world of dietitians is not like super saturated where there's all this competition or anything. Probably a doctor's office in your area doesn't have a residential dietitian that they refer out to. They probably don't. So it's more likely to be underutilized than you think. Don't be afraid to go in. So I did an internship at a pain and spine practice when I went back to school for billing and coding, and I learned that this is how the healthcare world works with people making connections. They literally do this as a practice. So I had at my rotation, I was there for maybe 3 weeks, and I was on different sites for a week at a time. And we would literally have companies come in, like a new chiropractor just came in, and they would set up a meeting with the doctor, and then they would spoil the staff. We got Dairy Queen, we got Chick-fil-A. There were drug companies that did this, and it was like there was a schedule for when they were going to come in and basically bribe the staff to have an agreement set up to be their go-to for this or that drug or refer out for this or that service. It's the norm in the industry. It is industry standard to do that. So walk in with, we're in the Philadelphia area. Soft pretzels are a big deal here. Yeah. So like one of the things that I could do, or I was told to do by my spine and pain practice manager, she recommended, like, just walk in with a bag of soft pretzels and say, hey, and introduce yourself, leave a stack of business cards, see if you can meet the physician or whoever is there, wherever you're at, the endocrinologist or whatever it is. Absolutely don't be afraid to do that because it's what everyone else is doing. It's not weird to just walk in, totally normal. And for all you know, you make a few connections like that, you just get funneled patients.
Yeah.
There are no dietitians running around doing this large scale. It's not happening. So don't be afraid to do it.
Yeah. And the business cards, I had business cards, and then I also had like a flyer that had my picture, all of the insurances that I accept, and then like information about like nutrition, counseling, and like what to expect with your first visit. And so I had doctor's offices where they would take the business cards, but then they would like post that flyer like in wherever, like a break room or somewhere where like other medical professionals, some of them had it like behind their like front desk area. So that was like a little easier for like their staff to be like, oh, hey, here's the dietitian we recommend, business cards here, or like grab the business card for them. So that's something else you could do too, is like a flyer, or even like those like trifold brochures if you have like classes or things that you normally do outside of like one-on-one nutrition counseling. That could be another really good resource and way to get your name out there too.
And it's not just primary care practices to do this at. Like there are a lot of primary care practices that you could drop your stuff off at. But if you are near like an endocrinologist or a pain management place or anywhere where dietetics could be relevant to helping that patient, any specialists in your area, there's probably a bunch of them.
Yeah. And
go ahead.
Think outside the box too. Like I'm even thinking like eye doctors. People don't necessarily think about that, but like they're doing screenings for patients with diabetes. And so they often don't have those referrals, and they don't have that kind of network because you wouldn't think like, oh, well, why would I connect with an eye doctor? Because it's really important. So those are other things to look at too, that you might not be like the an endocrinologist or like those kinds of specialists that you're like, oh yes, absolutely makes sense to work with a dietitian. So
the common through line is that everyone who's seeing doctors and specialists, generally everyone has some kind of health insurance. And if you have health insurance, there's a really strong possibility that you're covered for X number of sessions with a dietitian. So that it's more about awareness. You're going to have patients covered 100% most of the time, 3 visits, 6 visits, unlimited visits, depending on their diagnosis. So they're just underutilizing the service. It's more of an awareness thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Any closing, or what else do you have on that?
I actually just said that. I was just thinking like something else that you could be doing while you're waiting for, especially with insurance, is getting to know the insurance company and information about like billing and information about like just the insurance and the plans and all of that. They all have provider manuals. They're accessible through, generally, some of them are just like on a provider website where you don't have to log in and wait for an account. But that's also going to be really important too, because you want to understand billing, but you also want to understand like coverage and benefits and like all the different terminology that comes along with it. There's a lot of really good resources now with like the Academy of Nutrition and like stuff for members, but definitely look at those provider manuals because it'll give you like a really good overview of the insurance. And a lot of them now too, like I think Cigna I was looking at recently has like a guide to their insurance cards and like what the different symbols mean and things like that. So that's going to be something else to be spending some time on too.
Yeah, that's, if you're new to this space, that's a whole new world. Medical insurance, health insurance is its own thing, its own beast. And once you get into it and you start learning the lingo and kind of the lay of the land, you get better at it. That is something that is probably the number one thing Felicia consults on with clients, with consulting clients. And feel free to reach out to us to schedule consulting with Felicia. She does like a free 15-minute consult, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to schedule sessions with her, all the rates and everything are on the website. Don't be afraid to reach out for that sort of stuff. It's like the most common thing to get hung up on. And it's a bit of a battle because insurance companies don't want to pay if they don't have to. And that's every insurance company ever, whether it's health or auto or home, whatever, that's insurance as a model. So that it will be a point of contention for you, and it will behoove you absolutely to go through policies and things like that. But, feel free to reach out to us if you are struggling with that. All right. Anything, final advice, wrapping it up, something you'd suggest? Any specifics about staying organized, perhaps?
Yes. So this is a lot, when you're starting your practice and like fit all these pieces. So first thing, and this is something that I did, is I just kind of like brainstormed everything. So we're giving you like a comprehensive guide here, but prioritize what things need to happen first and like create a list for yourself so you could start chipping away at it. I started my practice while I was working a full-time job. So like I did this like piece by piece and not over like a weekend. So think to yourself, like, how can I break this apart into smaller components, getting down those priorities first, like the EIN, the NPI and all of that. I would highly suggest like a business notebook, a business folder. This could all be electronic as well, to just keep all of your documents, also all of your dates of when you submit stuff. So I had before I started using like Google Drive a lot, which is something that I now utilize a ton. I had like flash drives for all my different documents. And then I also had a business notebook where I kept track of when I submitted applications and like key information about like insurance and all that kind of stuff as like a quick guide for myself. That'll help you, especially in this beginning process when you're kind of like figuring things out, to make sure that you have all of your documents in one spot, like the EIN, for example. That letter is something that you're going to need to have for like insurances and, any state-specific paperwork that you get. Again, having that all in one spot will make it a lot easier when someone requests that from you. Business plan is something else you can consider. I didn't necessarily write like a traditional business plan, but that could be something if you're looking to kind of get yourself organized.
I feel like those are kind of outdated. I did my bachelor's like 15 years ago, and that was I had a class on business plan writing. I feel like that's old guy stuff at this point.
It's kind of like what we've talked about in terms of like marketing plan and things like that, but financials is a piece of it. The other big thing, which is something that I like about a business plan, like more of like there's like streamlined ones now, where like your company overview, and that can just be helpful to kind of brainstorm that. So then that way you have something for your website or to pitch for yourself too.
Yeah, it used to be like you'd write a SWOT analysis and like weaknesses and strengths, like all this stuff. You don't really need to do that anymore. I would say a marketing plan is probably more useful overall than like an old school business plan, probably.
Yeah, marketing plan is good. And actually that kind of brings you to like resources and mentoring. So they're for just like specific business information, not necessarily for dietitians, but the U.S. Small Business Association Administration, SBA, and then also SCORE, they have a ton of free information, resources. SCORE also does like free mentoring. So that could be a really good resource just for learning like marketing or financials. And they have a SCORE in particular has like worksheets, like they have a marketing one and creating like who's your target client and all that kind of stuff. And then also if you're an Academy member, their website has a lot of great information. And then there's also like the Nutrition Entrepreneurs group, which also has a lot of great information as well. Those two are more on like the paid side of things, but just kind of getting a handle on like the aspects of business, and then things like marketing and financials. But using those free resources can really be helpful.
Yeah, when you run your own business, you wear all the hats for your. In this sort of business, it's just you. Usually, it's just you. Felicia and I happen, to have each other, but like usually it's just a one person thing. And you have to become the dietitian, but also the marketer, the finance person, the legal expert in some aspects, the content creator, learning video and audio and things like that. And we didn't really touch on the legal stuff, but you could hire out for that too.
Yeah. So I work with an attorney now. When I first started my practice, actually, and this is something I would suggest, is checking out like your local library and then also these different business administrations, because a lot of them host like free legal clinics where you can meet with an attorney for like 30 minutes or an hour. And again, free legal clinic. So I actually did a few of those when I first started my practice, and I brought my patient forms, like the contracts that I had, and I had an attorney like actually review it. And then down the line, I ended up like having an attorney where I just do like a pay by need basically. So I'll block off like 45 minutes or an hour with him, and we might go over like different contracts, or I've had him review contracts of mine, things like trademarking. But having that expert is definitely useful, and it's worth the money. And again, also something that you can write off as a business expense. So keep that in mind.
And if you do want to get into content creation, just a couple little things. If you have a computer that's half decent, DaVinci Resolve is an excellent free video editor. You can use it to do audio work too. In terms of solely audio, we use Audacity for a lot of things. If you're on Mac, you've got iMovie, you've got GarageBand, great tools. If you're strictly mobile, you can do CapCut is a good one for mobile. Most of the apps have their own built-in sort of video editors and things, but if you want to get more into it, CapCut's good. CapCut also has auto captioning software, so if you create shorts or TikToks and you want the captioning and you like whatever the captioning tools are in the apps you use, you can use CapCut's a good one. And it's worth looking into some content creation, production stuff too, like lighting, like microphones, and learning what they are. Like these are studio dynamic microphones, super cardioid pickup pattern. That's, whatever. It's stuff worth getting into if you're going to get into the content creation side of things, especially if you're self-pay. It's probably more important for that.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a lot of links in the description for this.
Yes.
And feel free to go through things at your own pace. This could take you a few months. This could take you a couple of years.
Yeah.
It's up to you.
Just breaking it apart, kind of keeping yourself organized, but this process can get pretty overwhelming. So just again, taking it step by step, getting those big things off your checklist first, and then you can always like kind of slowly chip away at the rest of the list. So don't get overwhelmed by all the things you need to do. Just kind of focus on the next task that you have and kind of keep trudging along there.
And feel free to reach out via the comment section or on our website, www.perazanutrition.com. Links will be in the description for everything. Click through, take your time, enjoy the process as much as you can. And take it easy out there. Don't drive yourself nuts. It can take you as long as you want. Mm-hmm. So with that, I guess we'll wrap it up here. Feel free to reach out. But other than that, links for literally everything will be in the description. And I will have it time stamped out. You can check the description on YouTube for that, for timestamps. Unfortunately, if you're only listening, it'll be a little harder to navigate for specific steps, but I will leave relevant timestamps for you to be able to search for specific things in the show notes for the podcast as well. So with that, that's going to do it for us at the My Dietitian Journey podcast. Thanks so much.